audio setting. Okay, so let's do a quick content recap. Okay, so we have identified negative externalities of consumption. Okay, so earlier on, one of the common issues that I identified is that a lot of earlier students, they identify the wrong identity. Last week's assignment, education is not positive externalities. Consumption of education results in positive externalities. Okay, so they do not share the same identity. Likewise for this. Okay, so now let's go through the 6 steps again. Okay, so step number 1, we are supposed to identify and define the cause of market failure. Okay, so in this case, we have identified this to be a negative externalities of consumption. So it pays off for you to quickly define with respect to the extract. So if the extract tells you alcohol, so we want to illustrate, these are spillover effect or third-party costs that are going to be borne by others. They are not accounted by the consumers in the consumption of alcohol. So this is how you want to be specific. So you guys may want to download the script that I've written to you last week, and check your step work. And you can see this 6-step framework being utilized. So step number 2, what is step number 2? Can you all type out what is step number 2? What are we supposed to illustrate for step 2? Good. Kek Ming, good. Who else? So you realize that I am very slow down here, because we need the externality framework later on for info failure. If we can't even get this right, we cannot get the info failure framework right. Well, who else? What is step 2? We need to identify what is the external cause, right? Or external benefit. In this case, the consumption of alcohol is going to have an external cost to others. So remember, it is a third-party cost to others. Later on, we'll be learning info failure. Info failure will be looking at unknown cost to the first person. Or unawareness to the first person. So this is the key difference within the two. So what is the third-party cost to others? When we consume alcohol. Quickly, type it out. What do you think? How is others going to be affected by your consumption of alcohol? Hey, y'all want to dismiss early or not? If not, y'all can take it easy. So nuisance when you are drunk. So this is a third-party cost to others. Drink driving, right? And causing involuntary hurt to others when you are intoxicated. Destruction of public properties, taxpayers will have to pay for health costs. All these are third-party costs. So there are a list of inexhaustive third-party costs. Which one is the right one? So be careful. For case studies, always look out for the extract. Never ever invent one yourself. Although we know that there can be potentially a lot of third-party costs, always look out for the best fit third-party cost or third-party benefit. Step number 3. So step 3, step 5, and step 6 are the most problematic ones. Listen carefully. So when you receive your script from me, I want you all to look out for step 3, step 5, and step 6. Very, very problematic. A lot of students did not tell me what exactly is step 3. Now, what is step 3? See, a lot of people start to pray. Look upwards, look downwards. We need to illustrate what is the golden equation that we have learned. The golden expression. MPB equals to MPC. Exactly. So we have to explain Okay, how does a rational consumer decide how much to drink? They will consume up to MPB equals to MPC. Okay, so if you refer to last week's assignment, okay, you have to what? Okay, you have to contextualize with respect to what is given to you. Okay, education, then you have to contextualize with respect to education. So in this case, okay, the consumer, okay, the MPB to the consumer will be the utility and satisfaction that is granted to drinking alcohol, an additional unit of alcohol. Okay, the MPC will be the monetary and opportunity cost for drinking an additional unit of alcohol. Okay, and why is MPB equals to MPC? A lot of students miss out. What is the rationale? To maximize consumer satisfaction and welfare. If we are looking at the producer perspective, to maximize profit. Okay, so things that I keep mentioning here are important. I don't understand why is my writing keep disappearing. So scary. Like today, like there's ghosts at it. Okay, so let's complete this diagram. Okay, so y-axis. Okay, how do we label y-axis? A lot of students lose marks on the y-axis. What is y-axis? Type it out quickly. Y-axis stands for what? Cost and benefit. X-axis? Quantity, right? Good. Okay, so we are supposed to relate MPB equals to MPC. Right? And this is your private consumption level, QP. Okay, so we are supposed to illustrate a diagram. Okay, we'll complete the diagram now. Okay, so in the presence of external costs, we can see that your marginal social cost is going to be greater than your marginal private cost in the presence of the MEC, right? Okay, so common mistake, okay, the MEC, we are looking at the gap in between your MPC and your MSC. Okay, we are not looking at the triangle. The deadweight loss does not represent MEC. Okay, so the vertical summation between your social cost and your private cost will tell you what is your external cost. Okay, and we assume that your MPB equals to MSB. Now we can see that this is your socially optimal level to consume. Okay, later on we'll find out your deadweight loss. Okay, I'm going to show you that in a short while. Okay, so this is your deadweight loss. So make sure you get your diagram right. Right, step 5, you need to illustrate how the divergence will lead to a suboptimal level of consumption or production. So we can see that in the presence of the external cost, this leads to your marginal social cost being higher than your marginal private cost. Or this leads to a divergence in both your cost curves. And when we reference to the socially optimal level where MSB equals to MSC, okay, you realize that there will be a overconsumption. Very important word. A lot of students actually miss out, okay, in their last week assignment. Over or under consumption. Right, and the last step is how the deadweight loss arise. So like I've said, 3, 5, 6 is the most problematic illustration. So please address, especially 6. I'm going to spend a few more minutes to illustrate. How do we show the deadweight loss? Okay, the deadweight loss, you can stick to what? There are two means to use that. Okay, the first one that we want to illustrate is the trapezium approach. Okay, method 1. Trapezium approach requires you to identify the total social cost and total social benefit. Okay, the total social cost can be found under your marginal social cost. Okay, so the consumption between QS and QP, okay, will tell you that the total social cost between these two levels will be the green trapezium. Okay, I'll label this ABC, okay, for simplicity. Okay, so method 1. you'll want to find the key difference between total social cost and total social benefit between QS and QP. Okay, so total social cost, okay, we have QS, A, B, QP. Right? Okay, and likewise, we can see that the total social benefit is the area under your marginal social benefit. Do you see that? Okay, so your total social benefit will be QS, A, C, QP. So I would like you to illustrate these two, okay, and tell me, okay, what is the total net welfare? Okay, so in this case, you realize that when the total social cost exceeds total social benefit, there will be a net social cost of A, B, and C. Likewise, if total social benefit exceeds total social cost, then you need to tell me which are the 3 points as well. So this illustration is exceptionally crucial. You need to tell me the area of your total social cost and total social benefit and the net of these two. Okay, so this is method 1. Okay, you are netting off. Okay, I call this method A. Okay, method B. Okay, you can use the marginalist principle. Okay, and when we look at marginalist principle, we are looking at the present consumption level QP. Okay, the marginal social cost at point B exceeds your marginal social benefit at point C. Okay, so you can see here, at QP, your marginal social cost, point B, exceeds marginal social benefit, point C. So, when marginal social cost exceeds marginal social benefit, it simply tells us that when we consume an additional unit of alcohol, okay, the society is going to incur a higher cost as compared to the society gains from an additional alcohol consumption. Then we have the dead weight loss ABC. Okay, I leave it to you which one you are going to use. Okay, method A or method B to illustrate the dead weight loss. So later on, when we move on to info failure, we will make certain modifications for point 2, point 3, and point 5. The rest will be the same. Is everyone clear? Okay, so these 6 steps must be imprinted in your head. Okay, if not, we cannot proceed further. Okay? So with this, okay, let's set our learning objective. Okay, let me turn on the lights. Okay, you guys can prepare the book first. Okay, for those who don't have the books. Okay, prepare the books. Okay, so earlier on, we have recapped, okay, the 6-step framework. So today's objective, okay, we'll go on to uncover the rest of the causes of market failure. There are a lot more, okay, and we're not going to cover all today. Okay, I'm just going to briefly touch and go. Touch and go specific ones, okay, especially item 8. Okay, so things that we need to know today. Info failure, okay, underestimation of true cost. Okay, info failure, underestimation of true benefit. I'm so sorry, I'm not sure why is there a typo here. Okay, and I will start to introduce you the 6-step info failure framework. Okay, with a slight modification from our externality framework. Okay, and I will introduce you the concept of demerit and merit good. Okay, and a lot of students often abuse this. Okay, I'm going to illustrate when to use this and when not to. Okay. Item 6, public good. For my first year students, if public good is tested, okay, in your in any of your recent class tests, okay, there's still a good chance that it's going to come up for your June common test. If it hasn't been tested, okay, then June common test or your mid-years will sure come out. Okay, so focus on public good, very, very important. Okay, and the practice question today will be on public good also. Yeah, it's one of the newer questions that you will see for public good in case studies. Okay, item 7, item 8, they are not particularly widely tested. So I think there's a couple of second year students here. Okay, so second year students will probably experience item 7 and item 8 more often. Okay, so especially for item 8, okay, we will be covering this in term 3. okay, called market dominance. Okay, for my VJ students, we will learn it next year. Okay, for firms and decision. So I won't be covering item 8 in detail. Okay, I'll just touch and go. For my second year students here, okay, item 8 you need to know. Alright. After that, when we move on to overall courses, I'll give you a mind map, okay, of how do we construct all the courses. Okay, and you'll see that why is this so important? Because we'll be moving on to policies. Before we move on to policies, we need to know what are the problems first. If not, we cannot propose the correct policy. Okay, each problem will require a specific solution. Okay, so remember, okay, this is probably one of your first few times, okay, being introduced to solutions framework. Okay, so for solutions, make sure you know what problem you're solving first. If not, it will be rubbish in, rubbish out. All right. Okay, and after that, exam purpose, I will show you how is it going to be tested. All right. So just have a quick show of hands. Okay, who haven't learned public good yet? All learned. Just covered recently. Anything that I need to know? Any of these were not covered other than market dominance. Market dominance, I believe it hasn't been covered. But any of these hasn't been covered. Or not sure. Type it out. Okay, you can check your school notes if you like. Now, okay, I'm going to kickstart right now. Okay, so I'm going to move on to info failure. Okay, so we will be using the book closely. Okay, but I always like to build together. Okay, so let's flip to page 52. Okay, and I will tell you what are the things to look out for. Okay, is everyone at page 52? Alright, so okay, I want you all to put a star beside this. Okay, put a star here. Okay, I will address why is there a star needed. Okay, but for now, okay, let's focus on the diagram first. You realize that these two diagrams look awfully familiar to positive and negative externalities. Okay, but although they are similar, they look the same, but they are different in causes. So I'm going to talk about that. Okay, so put a star ready. Okay, once you have inserted a star in the book, then I'll cover. Okay, so there is some disclaimer that I'd like to make here. Okay, before I move on to these two diagrams. Alright, so the diagram that you see on the right, okay, is what we call underestimation of true cost. Okay, or okay, you underestimate the actual cost. Okay, true cost or actual cost are used interchangeably. Okay, so depends on what your school use, you stick to that. Okay, so now let's go through the same framework again. Right, so we always start off by drawing MPB and MPC. And any violent objections? The same, right? So any consumer will decide to consume goods up to MPB equals to MPC to maximize their satisfaction. So now, okay, how is this different from externality? Now let's look out for the example of alcohol again. Right, alcohol, cigarettes are very good examples of info failure as well. So we know that earlier on in the example of consumption of alcohol is going to result in third-party cost to others. Someone is going to be worse off as a result of us consuming alcohol. Now for info failure, we are going to look inwards. We are not going to look outwards. So this is the main difference. When we look inwards, we are concerned about what? Okay, what is the hidden cost to us? What is something that we don't know? Okay, or what is a particular cost that we systematically undervalue? Okay, so now based on what your school has covered, okay, what is a unawareness, okay, that may arise from the consumption of alcohol that may result in a higher actual cost to you? Based on what you know, quickly type out. Medical fees, okay, it's a monetary cost. Okay, it's still a perceived cost. Okay, so the way how you want to put it across are important. Okay, so someone brought up unawareness of the true effects of alcoholism, of health. Harms to your health only shows up years later. Damage done to health. So when you know that, okay, or rather, if you know about alcoholism, you realize that when you a prolonged period of consumption will lead to what? Liver damage, right? Okay, cirrhosis. I can't recall what is the term. Yeah. Okay. But liver damage is definitely something that's going to happen in the long run. Okay, but for the consumer, okay, would they necessarily know this outcome? Right, because this will only happen in the long run, right? And most importantly, there is no guarantee that the consumer will suffer from liver damage. Agreed? So what do the consumer does? Okay, so the consumer, okay, they are unaware of the actual cost to their own health in terms of liver damage. And what do? Okay, they will systematically undervalue this risk. Okay, so key concept that I want to cover here, this is a first party unknown cost, unknown to the user themselves. Okay, if they are aware of this, they probably won't consume that much alcohol. Okay, so key terms that you need to note. Okay, you need to insert the concept of perceive. So the perceived cost and the actual cost will not be the same here. So you realize that because of info failure, the actual cost will be substantially higher. Okay, some schools use the concept of true cost. That also works. You got to look out for what concept your school use, but the diagram typically don't differ a lot. Okay, only RI students use a separate illustration. Unless you're from RI, if not, I won't be covering that. Huh? Okay? So you can actually see that this framework is not going to be very different. Assuming that, okay, there is no change in your benefit. Okay, you can see that your actual cost will be your marginal social cost. And we see that same overconsumption. Okay, and the dead weight loss will be the same. Okay, so you can see, okay, with respect to the earlier diagram, okay, the graphical illustration is quite the same. So the only difference that you need to note, okay, that is going to change the whole meaning is the concept of perceive and actual. Okay, and one more common mistake, please pen this down. Okay, please do not label this as marginal external cost. There is no third-party cost involved in info failure. Like I've said, info failure is unknown first-party cost to oneself. Okay, when you don't know what is the actual health concerns or health risks that you incur when you consume the good. Is everyone okay with this? Hannah? Although I keep saying this, there are still students that are going to make the same mistakes. Okay, so please pen this down. Very important. Don't label MEC here. Okay, and if your school uses a separate approach that you're not sure, you can stay back and ask me. Oh, okay, I will be happy to address that. Okay, any questions, type it out in the chat. Okay, because I'm going to move on to the opposite, okay, which is underestimation of true benefits. And then I'm going to wrap up with the 6-step framework of how we can use the 6 steps down here. All right, so, info failure can come from the perspective of underestimation of true benefits. Remember the assignment that we did last week? The last week's assignment was education, right? Okay, and if you recall, the context, you realize that, the answer key did not cater for info failure because the extract was primarily about external benefit, right? Okay, how does third party benefit from you consuming education? So education can also result in info failure. How does it work here? So we need to look out for the rational consumer. What are some of the unknown benefits when they consume education? So the keyword here is unknown benefits to himself or herself. So maybe you guys would like to try. Okay, what is an unknown benefit to you? Okay, if you consume education. 1 second. Hey, I'm so sorry, the dog wants out. I think wants toilet. Networking. Okay. Networking, interesting. What else? So if you are familiar with the examples that I use, you realize that most of the time it leads to the same thing. Okay, that earlier on was unknown health cost to oneself, right? Okay, so we know that the MPB, okay, of consuming education last week, okay, if you look at the answer key, would be what? Okay, would be wages. Okay, so what are the wages that you can get, okay, for every additional unit of education that you consume? Okay, so the unknown benefit, okay, that you probably, okay, are going to get will be what? But you probably won't know because it's going to happen in the future. Okay, will be what? Career progression. Right? So if you study harder, you probably want, okay, end up with a scholarship, okay, and you probably get get parachute to some top ranking post, right? Okay, so you want to focus on the unknown. Okay, what happens when the consumer consumes education? What are some of the potential benefits, okay, that are not known to the consumer himself? Okay, career progression. Someone brought up networking. Maybe it will give you higher access to, okay, better network of leaders. Maybe, right? Maybe, but we won't know. Okay, and you possibly won't know that at your current level, at your current age. All right. So let's go through this again. Okay, the rational consumer will consume education up to QP. Okay, and if we realize that there are unknown benefits to oneself, okay, in terms of future career progression, okay, in terms of traveling opportunities that you may unlock in the future, then in that case, you realize that your perceived benefit is going to be lower than your actual benefit. So the catch here is, it is unknown benefit to oneself. Last week, we covered third-party benefits to others. Okay, so read the answer key last week. Okay, it mentioned about what? Okay, others who benefit with higher wages even though they are not studying. Okay, as the result of the particular region being more educated. Okay? Okay, and we assume that ceteris paribus holds for your cost curve. Now we can see this. Okay, so your actual curve will always be equated to your marginals, will be equate to your marginal social cost or marginal social benefit. Okay, and you realize that, okay, this is fairly similar to your positive externalities diagram, fairly similar. Okay, it's just that the terms we use are different. Okay, so you can see that this is your deadweight loss. Okay, I'm not going to illustrate the deadweight loss one more time. Yeah, so if you guys don't know how it was derived, okay, check the earlier illustration. Okay, the earlier lesson. Okay, we have gone through this quite thoroughly. Okay, and common mistake, do not label this as MEB. Okay, do not label this as MEB. There is no any MEB present here. Okay, this is info failure. Info failure is info failure. Okay, and make sure you label this as, okay, what's the gap here? Does anybody know how do we label this gap? Okay, when your private consumption is lower than your socially optimal level. Okay, what is this? Okay, under consumption. Good. All right, good for those who have participated. Now, okay, I'm going to quickly illustrate the 6 steps for info failure. Please copy this down. Okay, so like I've said, the 6 steps info failure framework stems from the externality framework. Okay, so we are just going to do some modification. Okay, so the modification comes from step 1, step 2, step 3 a bit, and step 5. Okay, so step 1, okay, instead of identifying it as an externality, we need to define and identify the source of info failure. Okay, so it could be, in this, let's use the alcohol instance. Okay, it could be underestimation of true cost of consuming alcohol or actual cost. Step 2, instead of identifying the externality, we are going to identify the source of unawareness. So you want to look out for, okay, extracts that suggest question mark. Consumers are not aware, okay, of a particular effect. Consumers underestimate the effects of a particular effect. Look out for those. Okay, this will tell you that there is unawareness being present. Okay, so not externality anymore. We're looking at first party benefits or first party costs. They are all unknown to oneself. Step 3 is the same. Just that we have to be concerned whether is it info failure at the benefit side or at the info failure at the cost side. And we need to start to insert perceive and actual to whichever side there is affected. Okay, so you can also use true. Some schools use true to interchangeably with actual. Okay, step 4, diagram is the same. Pretty much the same. I've illustrated the key differences. Step 5, okay, the divergence that results in an under or over consumption and deadweight loss. So the key difference of this step 5 and what we have learned under externality, okay, the divergence is caused by unawareness. Okay, it's not caused by info failure. So you can illustrate unawareness here. Okay, or you can use awareness gap. Okay, so these are the terms that are used often to illustrate the gap between your actual and your private benefit. Okay, or actual and perceived cost. Actual and perceived cost, actual and perceived benefit. Okay, so the divergence, make sure you get it right. Okay, don't label this as MEC or MEB. Okay, the step 6 on deadweight loss is exactly the same. Okay, you can use either the total social cost and total social benefit approach, okay, netting off the two, or you can use the marginalist principle. Okay, so I would say step 1, step 2, and step 5, okay, these are the main difference. Step 3, a little bit different in the sense that we need to attach perceive and actual to one side of the equation. Alright. So with this, okay, I am going to move on to the most conceptually, it's not difficult, okay, this concept of demerit and merit good, but somehow a lot of students get this mixed up. Okay, that's why remember earlier on I asked you to put a star, okay, at page 52. Okay, you realize that? I asked you all to put a star on page 52. So what constitutes to a merit and demerit good? Okay, let's look out for the definition first. Okay, if you look out for the definition, merit good, okay, they are goods that are deemed socially desirable but under-consumed. Demerit good, socially desirable but over-consumed. Socially undesirable but over-consumed. So to constitute to a merit good or a demerit good, two conditions must be present. Alright, so if it is a merit good, you have to exhibit positive externality of consumption together with underestimation of true benefits. So these two must be present. If any of these two conditions are not present, we cannot call this a merit good. Okay, so let me repeat. Learning doesn't mean that you have to abuse this. Alright? So sometimes in case studies, okay, you have to look out for the extract and decide whether both of the conditions are present. Most of the time, externalities will be there. Okay, info failure, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Okay, if info failure is not present, then we don't need to bring in merit good. Okay, you can put it at home. Just focus on the externalities approach. Okay, for my H2 students, essays are likely to test you on merit and demerit. Then in that case, you need to bring in both. Okay, so in that case, once you realize that the question is testing on merit good, remember the 6-step approach that we use? Okay, 2 separate body paragraphs of the 6 steps. Okay, it will be solid, good enough. Same, likewise for demerit good. Okay, demerit good must contain both underestimation of true cost and negative externalities of consumption. It must be these two together. If any of these two is absent, okay, then we cannot consider this a demerit good. Alright? So, like I've said, for merit good, okay, the thought process for demerit good is the same. If you look out for case studies, alright, your priority is always externalities. Then info failure. Externalities will more or less be there. Okay, and when you also source out info failure, then there's a good chance that demerit good, okay, will be tested. Then you can label or identify as demerit good. So it's not necessarily good when you identify as demerit good because there's a lot more things to write. Okay, especially for case studies are very important. Okay, so I hope I have distinguished between externality and info failure, and under what circumstance we introduce them as merit and demerit good, and under what circumstance we can keep them at home. Is everyone clear? Yeah, very important. Okay, let me drink some water first, a bit thirsty. Alright, I'm going to move on to public good. Public good will be the focus of today. Okay, so for those students who found public good difficult, not sure what public good is talking about in school, okay, this is your last chance to close up the gap. Okay, I will be very gentle, very slow, okay, and I will also show you what are some of the ways public good can be tested. Okay, the way public good can be tested is quite predictable. Okay, depending on whether is it essay or case studies. Okay, so with that, okay, let us move on to public good. Page 45. Let's flip to page 45. Alright, so before we cover public good, okay, you guys have to know that market failure, okay, generally means that there is inefficient allocation of resource. Okay, so in terms of inefficient allocation of resource, okay, there are different magnitudes. Alright, so what do we mean by different magnitudes? Okay, so I'm not sure whether your school uses the concept of complete market failure and partial market failure. Anyone uses that in school? Complete and partial? Yeah, no, okay, Keng Ming. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Okay, if we look out for externalities, you realize that, okay, externalities, no doubt it results in inefficient allocation of resource, but there is still some form of consumption or some form of production. It's just under or over. It's not at a socially optimal level. Right? So that is what we call partial market failure. The price mechanism doesn't work well, okay, but it's still functioning at a degree. So when we talk about public good, public good is very special. Public good will tell us that your resource allocation will completely fail. Okay, there will be zero provision of the good. Okay, that's why we call this complete market failure. So later on, I'll guide you on the thought process of how we are going to relate to complete market failure. Okay, so for those who are not familiar with partial and complete, okay, I hope you guys can differentiate between the two. Complete is definitely more undesirable lah, right? Okay, because total zero provision of the good. Okay, so now let's look out for the definition, everyone. Okay, the definition has 4 key ingredients. Okay, which are the 4 key ingredients we need to look out for? Careful. Number 1, okay, the good has to be intrinsically valuable. It means that the good, okay, is going to help the society. Intrinsically valuable. And if you leave it to the free market, there will be zero provision. Okay, so not provided by the free market. And why is that so? Because of the 2 characteristics of non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So these are the 4 conditions that you need, okay, whenever you're supposed to define public good. A public good is never defined as non-excludable and non-rivalrous. It has to include, okay, that is a social position, okay, is socially desirable or intrinsically desirable. But if we leave it to the free market, there will be none provided. Okay, are you all familiar with the 4 points? Alright, so I'm going to move on to the popular way of testing public good. Okay, you guys invested your afternoon with me to know how this is going to come out for exam, right? Okay, you guys did not invest in me to tell you what your school lecturers can tell you is the same thing. Yes? How is it going to turn out for exam? I want you to look out for, okay, these two rows. Where's my pen? Here. For case studies are typically concerned about the definition, okay, of non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Okay, so let me repeat. When we look at case studies, the case study will typically provide you with a kind of good. And they will ask you to determine whether this is a public good or not. So based on these 2 characteristics, we are supposed to deduce, okay, whether this is a public good or not. We don't need to explain further, okay, with the second column, which is the links to market failure. We don't need that. If it's an essay for my H2 students, then you probably need this. Okay, you need to memorize this. I'll try to use an easy way for you not to memorize. Okay, so I will cover the explanation in depth, and this will be tested in your mock exam coming up, okay, in June holidays. For those who are participating, my first year students, I will release the date to you all in a short while. Okay? Alright. Ready? So now let's look at the first characteristics, non-excludability. What does non-excludability tells us? Okay, it's always important to learn from examples. There are specific examples, okay, that are used widely. Okay, so things like that you see in your lecture notes, like lighthouse, right? Was lighthouse used in your lecture notes? Lighthouse, street lighting, national defense. Any other examples that I don't know? Later on, I will play around with more examples, but these are the common examples. Okay, parks. Okay, parks. Let's consider street lighting. Okay, so for instance, okay, you look out for the definition is impossible or too costly to prevent non-paying consumers to consume the good. What does it mean? Tsunami warning system. Yes, okay, that works. Yeah, that works. Yeah, let's use street lighting since it's here. So let's say Mr. Teo paid for this street lighting, right? Okay, and Kek Ming is standing beside me. Right, Kek Ming did not pay for that. Okay, so can we prevent Kek Ming from using the light to navigate around the streets? It's quite hard, right? Unless we blindfold Kek Ming or we blind him. Okay, if not, okay, without exhausting any legal means, or rather without using illegal means, okay, we cannot prevent Kek Ming from consuming street lighting as a non-payer. Agreed? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the explanation part. The explanation part is slightly tricky, but it's the easier one among the two. So a lot of students often get non-excludable and non-rivalrous mixed up. Okay, you can't afford to mix them up. Okay, so step by step. So if we know that cake cannot be excluded, okay, what will happen next? We realize that this will result in a problem of what we call free riding problem. What does free riding problem means? It means that people like cake okay, would not want to pay, okay, for the street lighting because they know that someone else is paying for that. Okay, and from a layman coffee shop perspective, please don't use this term. This is what we call leeching on somebody else, right? You don't like people to call you leech, right? Yeah, but don't use this term. So free riding problem will arise. Okay, people like cake will not want to reveal their true willingness to pay for the good. And for people like Mr. Teo who paid for the street light, do you think people like Mr. Teo will continue to exist? They wouldn't want to pay for street light anymore, right? Okay, so people like Mr. Teo will start to withhold their financing the street light, and they will start, all of us, okay, will start to withhold our demand for the good. So the concept that we want to bring in is free riding problem. Okay, free riding problem will result in people withholding their willingness to pay, or the concept of hidden demand or concealed demand. When people start to not reveal their true willingness to pay for street light. And what happens when there is no demand or hidden demand? Okay, then price signaling cannot happen. In the absence of a hidden demand, then or demand curve, then price signaling cannot happen. When price signaling cannot happen, then producers are unable to respond, okay, to the needs of the society to produce the good. Therefore, this will lead to zero provision. Okay, so key terms you need to note. Free riding problem. How does free riding problem arise? And what happens to the demand? Yeah, so various schools use various illustrations for demand. Some schools call it hidden. Some schools call it ineffective. Some schools use the concept of concealed. Stick to your school. Is that clear? Okay, one of the three words that I use must be there. If not, check with me, type it out. Okay, I'll let you know whether is it correct or not. So far, everyone good with non-excludability? Now let's look out for non-rivalrous. Non-rivalrous, okay, if we look out for the definition perspective or the CSQ perspective, all we need to know, okay, is that the consumption of one good will not deprive the other consumer, okay, for the same good. So there's also another term that is often used interchangeably. Will not deprive the another consumer for the quality and quantity available, the two Qs. Okay, check out your school notes whether they use the two Qs. So let's go back to the street lighting. So if cake is consuming the street lighting, will it necessarily make the street lighting any dimmer? Or will the street lighting cease to exist because everyone consumes the street lighting? No, right? So we realize that since supply will not be depleted for every additional user, so this is the keyword, okay, your supply is not going to be depleted by an additional user, the marginal cost of allocating the good to an additional user is zero. Okay, so you may want to add this in. Some of the schools use the concept of supply. Okay, supply is not depleted. It's not depleted by an additional user. Then the marginal cost to allocate, okay, the good to an additional user will be zero. So this is something that I won't be able to address right now. Okay, we will need to go to firms and decision before I can illustrate what is P equals to MC. Okay, so all we need to know is to accept now, okay, that allocative efficiency occurs where P equals to MC. Okay, so in short, P is your willingness and ability for consumers to pay for the good at that price. MC is the cost, the price and the cost for the producer to produce at the particular output. Okay, so we can see that when your marginal cost is equals to of providing an additional good the consumer is equals to 0, okay, we can see that your price is equals to 0. Okay, so all we need to is just to substitute 0 into this equation. Okay, and price will be equals to 0. And when price is equals to 0, okay, it simply means that producers will not be incentivized to produce a good at 0 price because it's not valuable or not profitable. And therefore, this will lead to 0 provision. Okay, so for my H1 students, okay, I need you to accept what is P equals to MC at surface value. Okay, if not, talk to me separately. I will show you what are the additional readouts they need to. For my H2 students, okay, I will cover this a little bit more, okay, when I move on to firms and decision. Then you realize what is the significance of P equals to MC. Okay, and conversely, when P is not equals to MC, this will lead to market dominance. Okay, so this is a story for another day. Okay? All right, so far, okay, questions regarding the essay approach. The essay approach requires you to write more in depth. And remember to contextualize. Okay, you cannot use the good. You need to go to the extent of street lighting. Remember the context that I use? Okay, when I consume the good, when Kek Ming consume the good, okay, it will not deprive Mr. Teo from the dimness, okay, of the light. This is what we mean by the quality or quantity. Now I'm going to go on to some advanced concepts, okay, that are widely tested, and this is where it starts to turn tricky. Now, a lot of students, okay, especially newbies or first year students, they often fall into the trap. Okay, whenever there is a public that is added in front of a particular good. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so for instance, public Wi-Fi, public toilet, okay, public whatever. Okay, can you all come out one good each of public whatever? Okay, then we scrutinize all this good. Public what else? Public road. What else? Public library. Public housing. Anything more? Okay, I think more or less lah, huh? Okay, let's use one by one each. Now, okay, in case studies, they love to test you. They will ask you, explain whether public Wi-Fi, public toilet, public road, public library, public housing is a public good. So, remember, all we need to is just to scrutinize them on the definition basis. Okay, whether is it non-excludable or is it rivalrous. Now, public Wi-Fi, okay, is it a public good? Okay, yes or no? Okay, so maybe I'll get Kek Ming. Okay, since you brought up no, okay, why is public Wi-Fi not a public good?
Because I think Wi-Fi can be excludable through password, and then it's also like rivalrous because if there's a lot of people on the Wi-Fi, then the broadband will be affected. Then network speed will be slow.
Okay, so do you all agree with this approach or this line of thought? Okay, so public Wi-Fis are mainly not password protected, mainly, right? Okay, some of the public Wi-Fis have password. So if there's a password, it means that people can be excluded if they don't know the password, right? But more importantly, they are rivalrous because bandwidth is going to be constricted. When too many people are on the public Wi-Fi, this will slow down the internet usage, okay, speed of others. okay, then then you realize that your supply will be depleted with every additional user. So this is how you want to scrutinize, ladies and gentlemen, through the excludable and rivalrous approach. Now, what about public toilet? Public toilet. Is public toilet public good? Okay, so someone brought up that there are limited number of toilet seats, right? You mean toilet seats, right? Okay, yeah. Okay, so when the cubicles are being used, it means that it deprives others from using. Agree? Especially the ladies, y'all can attest to that, right? Every time after cinema, you realize that there's a long queue for toilet for the ladies. Oh, so it's definitely rivalrous in nature. But whether is it excludable or not, okay, it depends. Some of the public toilet, there's a gantry, right? Some of the public toilet is free to use. Oh, okay, so if any of this condition is not satisfied, we cannot call this a public good. Okay, public road, okay, our KIV first. This will be tested later. It will be tested later. Okay, so our KIV first. Public library. Is public library public good or not? There's still a lot more public transport also . So is public library a public good? So always look out for the two characteristics, right? So for excludability, we need to look out for whether people can be excluded from consuming public library. Okay, so unfortunately, access to public library is free, right? You cannot block people from using that. But it could be rivalrous in consumption because of the limited number of books to be borrowed or the limited number of seats in the library. Make sense? Okay, so it is rivalrous in consumption. When I borrow the book, you don't get to borrow. Okay, when I consume the chair, okay, you don't get to consume. When there are too many people in the library, okay, then it will be very noisy. Okay, all this approach will work. So you realize that as we go on and on and on, anything that we have a library that has a public in front normally turns out not to be a public good. Public housing, okay, has to be rivalrous and excludable, right? Need to pay, it's not free, right? And when I buy the house, okay, you don't get to stay at the house. You don't get to buy it. Okay, there's only one unit of supply. Public transport, excludable. It's not free. You need to pay for the public transport, right? It's also rivalrous because there are limited number of seats, especially in a crowded area and a crowded timing. Okay, it's going to affect your experience consuming public transport. Alright, so this is the advanced version. Most of the time, they'll like you to test you on public good or any other good. Okay, so you go through this thought process. Then you justify from the non-excludable part and the non-rivalrous part. Make sure you contextualize with respect to the extract. Is that clear? Now I'm going to move on to the hard part. The hard part, okay, tells us that there are certain goods, okay, that are what we call quasi-public good. Have your school covered this concept before? Quasi-public good? What is quasi-public good? Okay, later on this will be tested. Quasi-public good means that this particular good behaves like a chameleon. Okay, depending on specific conditions, it can be a public good and it can be not a public good. So the example of roads, okay, most of the time roads and highways are used as an example of a quasi-public good. So what do we mean by that? Okay, so now let's look out for non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Are public roads excludable or not? Yes or no? Or is it free to use? You ask yourself, right? If it is not free to use, then there must be a toll booth or there must be an ERP to charge that, agreed? Okay, so we can see that a public road can be excludable or non-excludable. Okay, it is excludable during peak hours. Okay, when you have to pay ERP, right? But when it is non-peak hours, then usage is free. Agreed? Anyone can drive on the road so long as it's non-peak. What about non-rivalrous? Okay, is public road rivalrous in consumption? Will the consumption of the road by one motorist deprive the others in terms of quality and quantity of the road available? So same, we can go through this process. Peak hours. Peak hours will result in what? Traffic jam, right? Traffic jam will lead to what? Okay, slowing down motorists' transport time. Okay, and worsening the travel experience. Okay, so when I drive on the lane and when it's severely congested, it's going to slow down other people's transport timing as well. Congestion will lead to rivalrous in nature. Make sense? But non-peak means what? It means that if the road is sufficiently wide enough, or if you drive at a non-peak hour, then when I consume the road as a motorist, it's unlikely to affect you. Okay, because the road is hardly used. Okay, so if the road is hardly used, the supply of the road won't be depleted. So it depends on how extensive the road is being used. Okay, non-congestion will lead to non-rivalrous consumption. Is everyone following me? So some of the goods will exhibit this kind of characteristics. Okay, under specific conditions, they will be a public good. Under specific conditions, they will fail the litmus test to be a public good. Alright, I'm going to wrap up public good. Okay, so later on will be on public good. Okay, so I'll guide you on how to approach the public good question in a short while. Right, so I'll just quickly run through factor immobility. Okay, factor immobility is for H2 only. Likewise for market dominance. So my H1 students no need to know this. Don't think there's any H1 students here. Okay, if you're a H1 student, you may want to fast forward. Okay, H2 students, listen carefully. So it is quite unlikely that factor immobility will be tested, okay, such early in your first year syllabus. Okay, so if I'm not saying that it's not going to come out, I'm just saying that it won't come out that soon, probably in your second year. Okay, and it's not difficult, so I'm going to quickly guide you through what is factor immobility. Okay, so if you look out for page 55, factor immobility tells us that there is inefficient allocation of resource at the factor market. What does factor tells us? Factor tells us your factor of production, right? Okay, it could be land, labor, capital, machinery, whatever. Okay, at the factor market, there is allocative inefficiency. Okay, where your FOPs cannot move into other markets of production due to some of the reasons that I'm going to illustrate right now. Okay, so things to look out for. Okay, FOP, okay, they are primarily labor driven. Okay, so you can also interpret them as labor immobility. Labor is an important factor of production. Okay, so for simplicity, I will be illustrating from the labor perspective. But it can also be capital and machinery immobility. Can also be that as well. Okay? So for factor immobility, there are two broad categories, okay, that you need to be concerned about. Okay, there is going to prevent allocative efficiency to happen in the FOP market. So the first one is what we call occupational immobility. Okay, let me repeat. occupational. Something to do with job. Okay, the second one is geographical. Okay, so if you find geographical too hard to register, okay, I would advise you to put this non-job related. Okay, now let's look at the more prominent one. Okay, what does occupational immobility means? Okay, if you read the definition, it tells us that there are barriers, okay, for FOP to move across different sectors due to, okay, a particular concept, what we call job skill mismatch. Let me repeat, job skill mismatch, especially prominent among labor. So the barriers that we encounter here are, okay, inadequate skill sets. For instance, okay, you realize that right now, okay, the up and coming thing is what? Coding, right? Or cryptocurrency, right? So can anyone, okay, pick up coding or become a crypto trader overnight? Unlikely. Okay, they have to learn and they have to spend time to acquire skills. So this is what we call a particular barriers, because you don't have the skill set, okay, to locate a job. So even though there's a job opening, okay, in a coding company, okay, or crypto, okay, because if you don't have a skill set, you're not able to locate a job there. Okay, and this is what we call occupational immobility. Okay, you do not have sufficient skill set. Simple enough, right? So geographical immobility is significantly easier. Okay, they are due to whatever reasons they are not related to skill or non-job related. So things like what? Okay, unwillingness to relocate, family ties. Okay, you can add on to this list. There's a lot more. Okay, you see unwillingness to relocate. Family ties. Okay, so if right now I ask you to relocate to Shanghai now, okay, there's a better job opportunity in Shanghai, would you want to relocate? Okay, you guys know what's happening in China now, right? Yeah? So this is a classical example of geographical immobility. Because, okay, right now China is preventing foreigners from coming in the first place. And even, okay, if they open up, okay, people don't want to relocate there because of very stringent COVID rules there, right? And you can also, and there are a lot more other things. For instance, okay, language barrier could also be, okay, a form of geographical immobility, right? If you cannot speak the native tongue, okay, of that particular country, then you probably cannot. You don't want to work there as well. So it simply means that due to whatever reasons, okay, you are not able to respond to demand for a job offer in other location. So even though, okay, there is a job opening, okay, you, because of whatever reasons that I've mentioned, okay, you refuse to relocate. Okay, so remember to distinguish between the two. First one is due to job. Okay, job skill. The other one is due to willingness to relocate. Okay, so there are a lot of things that add on to willingness. Financial costs, immigration tightening policy, okay, family ties, okay, language barrier, all these can. So far so good? Alright, I'm going to quickly touch on the last one. Okay, so for my second year students, okay, you may want to look out for page 53. Okay, so page 53 is on market dominance. Okay, a lot of my second year students struggle really badly with that. So I'm not going to cover this now. Okay, I'm going to cover this in term 3. Okay, so for my second year students, please make time for firms and decision in term 3. Please come back for revision classes. Okay, so the whole idea, okay, of market dominance is tied to firms and decision. Okay, and the whole idea is behind P is not equals to MC. So I won't be covering this. I just point out to you that this is important. This is a cross topic between market failure and market structure, firms and decision. So with this, okay, I am going to move on to the last part of building a mind map. Okay, so I'm just going, please copy this down. It's going to be very useful in your revision. So I'm just going to give you an overview, okay, of what are the overall causes, okay, of market failure. Okay, so the first one that we have learned is externalities, info failure, public good, vector immobility, what else? Can't recall. Anything else? Merit, demerit good. Demerit good. Anything else? Market dominance. Okay, these are the main few. So like I've said, we studied this for a good reason. Okay, the odds for externality, info failure, and merit, demerit good are exceptionally high. Okay, the rest are not so much. Not so much. Okay, so within this, you have to break it down. Okay, so externality, we have positive and negative, right? And within positive and negative, we have consumption and production. See? Negative, we also have consumption and production. Info failure, we have underestimation of true cost. And underestimation of true benefit. Okay, public good. Okay, what are the two characteristics? Still remember? They are non-excludability and non-rivalrous. Okay, factor immobility, we have occupational immobility and geographical immobility. Okay, so you have to be familiar to what? Okay, to break them down into sub-portions. Okay, market dominance, okay, we will cover that in the future where P is not equals to, is greater than your MC. Merit and demerit good, we are looking at these two combination. Okay, we are looking at a consumption-based positive and negative externalities combined with underestimation of true cost and true benefit. Okay, so like I've said, okay, these two conditions must be present. So merit good must contain positive externality of consumption plus underestimation of true benefit. Alright, demerit good will be the opposite. Negative externalities of consumption plus underestimation of true cost. Alright, so under info failure, there is one more that I haven't covered. Yeah, that one will be covered under market failure 3 called asymmetric information. Okay, anyone learn asymmetric information already? Have encountered that in school? Alright, so under asymmetric information, we will have adverse selection and moral hazard. Okay, this one will be covered sooner. So you realize that it is very extensive and we will be learning a lot of solutions, okay, very soon. So whichever solution that you have learned, don't memorize. You need to know what problem you need to solve first. So when you revise, when you do your own outline, when you do your own mind map, okay, you can potentially work around this mind map and start to spin off what are the solutions for all these problems. Okay, so for those who have learned solutions already, maybe negative externalities, you have tax. Positive externalities, you have subsidy. Then you can start to insert them in the tree diagram that you have drawn down here. Okay, extension of the tree diagrams. Alright, okay, so if you miss this out, I'll put it up on the LMS. You can make a copy of this, okay, when it's uploaded. So for exam purpose, okay, make sure you can adopt the 6-step info failure framework. It is just a slight modification of the externality one. Identifying cases of merit and demerit good and knowing when to use them and when not to. I mentioned before, For merit and demerit, you must do a checklist. Both externality and info failure must be present. If not, okay, don't use merit, demerit. Public good, okay, we need to contextualize, okay, with respect to the definition. Remember, we went through the exercise of public toilet, whatever, right? Remember, go through the exercise and pen it down. Market dominance will be covered, okay, in a story for another day. It is important, but story for another day. Clear? Alright, so I would like you all to have a really short break. Really short one, okay, so that we can kickstart our time practice and end on time. Okay, so when you are back, please turn on your webcam. Thank you. Alright, thank you, Jens, for coming back. So we will be looking at this question, driving out carbon emission. Okay, you should see part A and part B here. Let me know if you are seeing the same question, yeah? Okay, great. The girls are responding faster. Right, so I see that Sarah and Alice replied. So I'm going to assume all of you are seeing the same question. Okay, so I'll quickly kickstart. Okay, so experience from yesterday. The extract seems to have very little value add, okay, to the answer. Let's see how you guys can apply, okay, especially for part B. Okay, so part A, I won't guide you guys through. It's a very simple normative statement kind of question. Okay, so okay, it's a good refresher on normative statement. So part B is the focus of today. So listen carefully. Okay, for part B, okay, this is the newer question types that you need to be concerned about. Okay, that involves a two-part process: explain and comment. Okay, so for explain and comment question, you will want to break this up into 5 marks and 2 marks, or whichever mark allocation that favors explain. Okay, so the first word will always give you more marks. Okay, I'll talk about what is the role of comment later. Okay, so now let's look out for the first word. Explain the nature of a public good, right? And the context that's used here is road. See that? So, how are you going to develop your first 5 marks? You are going to explain how road is a public good. Let me repeat. Okay, explain the nature of a public good from the perspective of a road. Okay, you have to explain how road is a public good. So you don't jump straight into illustrating road is not a public good. First, it's not the correct way to open the question or start a question. Okay, you always respect the question by illustrating how road is a public good. So, how are you going to start this question? 1 mark to define what is non-excludable. 1 mark that is going to be given to non-rivalrous. 3 marks for you to justify why road is a public good. So remember we went through the checklist. Okay, the checklist tells us that in order to be a public good, it must satisfy non-excludable and non-rivalrous, right? So you have to find means and ways to justify why road is non-excludable or why road is non-rivalrous. Okay, so this is how we respect the question. Now the comment comes in as an antithesis. Okay, what do we mean by antithesis? Antithesis, the opposite will be thesis. So the thesis, road is a public good. For comment question, remember, you will always include an antithesis. Okay, so the antithesis will be road is not a public good. So how you want to develop this? Okay, you will want to scrutinize on either how road can be excludable under specific circumstance or how road can be rivalrous in specific circumstance. Remember I used the example of quasi-public good? Then this is the case to use how the chameleon or how the shape-shifting element comes into the picture. When road is not a public good, then we have to relax the assumption. Okay, what could have caused road to be excludable? Or what could have caused the usage of road to be rivalrous? Clear? Okay, so normally, okay, we will not experience explain and comment. So they will go straight up front and tell you, explain whether a public library is a public good. Okay, explain whether public toilet is a public good. Then you just go through the checklist. But in this specific outline or this specific question, you have to go through a 2-step process. You have to agree with the question with the thesis, and then you have to refute this with an antithesis. The weightage will always favor the thesis. You have to justify why is it a public good. Alright? So this is one of the newest way that will be tested. So for our first year students, pay attention. Okay, this is a very high risk question that's going to likely to be turned out to come off an exam. Okay? So I'm going to give you all my second year students, listen carefully. My second year students, okay, the suggested timing is 15 minutes. Okay, my first year students, this is granted your first time doing such a question, these 2 questions, so I'm going to give you all 20 minutes. Okay, so my second year students should strive to finish within 15 minutes. Huh? Okay, so this is the suggested difficulty that I have for all of you. Is everyone clear? First year 20, second year 15. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start the timer. Okay, when you are ready, okay, you can kickstart right now. Good luck. Alright, time's up, stop writing, thank you. So, I'm going to explain. Okay, in a short while, I'll be sending you the answer key. The answer key is not very long, okay, so you can do your corrections on the spot. So please prepare your green pen right now. And the submission timing for this assignment is 12 midnight. Okay, so I have captured all your participation. Okay, any later than 12 midnight tonight, okay, will not be graded. So if you have difficulties submitting by tonight, please inform me. Clear? Okay, I will drop the answer key before the meeting ends. Alright, any questions that you have for me, please raise it up. Okay, and I will I'll clear it on the spot. Okay, utilize the chat function. So, what is the main characteristic of a normative economic statement? Identify one example from extract 1. Okay, so the first mark will be allocated to a definition. Okay, so it expresses a opinion or value judgment that cannot be tested or appealed to statistics. So, question, what is the opposite of normative statement? Type it out. What is the opposite? What is the opposite? Quickly. Great. Okay, good. Alice, good. Jiaming, good. Raphael, the rest. Okay, positive statement. Positive statement, the opposite. Okay, so it is a value judgment or something really subjective. So you are supposed to look out for key phrases that suggest that it is a subjective judgment. So remember, in order to express an opinion, normally we should be looking out for the key phrase that's starting with S. What did I mention in the very first lesson with all of you? What's the key phrase that we're looking out for? S. Which is the S word that we should be looking out for? That suggests that it is a normative statement. Good, Jiaming. Right? So you should be looking out for keywords such as should. Okay, should will suggest that it is a suggestion. A suggestion is likely to be subjective. Okay, so the government should ensure greater support to all this. Or India has set a amphibious whatever target. Or infrastructure is a key driver of growth, employment, better quality of life. Okay, any of these three. Personally, Mr. Teo's favorite is number 1. Very clear-cut winner. Okay, so look out for should. Clear? Any questions for me? Type it out. Okay, I'll grab from there. Alright, the focus for today will be public good. Okay, so please bookmark this question. Okay, this question will be quite iconic, especially for case studies. One of the newer question types that are going to be phased in. Right, so earlier on I've given you an outline. Okay, so let's see whether there is an adherence to the outline. First mark, define what is non-excludability. Okay, so long as you follow the book, you should be more or less right. Second mark, define what is non-rivalrous. If you follow the book, you will be more or less right as well. So it's the next 3 marks that's going to be a little bit tricky. Okay, so the next 3 marks, pay close attention. How can we address this to be non-excludable? So first of all, okay, we need to remember the quasi-public good that we play around with the example earlier on. Okay, we need to find means and ways to justify that it's non-excludable. Okay, so in order for it to be non-excludable, okay, it simply means that it is hard to prevent, right? So in order for it to be hard to prevent, okay, so you can come up with suggestions such as difficult to impose a fee. Okay, so what could have caused it to be difficult to impose a fee? It may probably illustrate, okay, that the country may be sufficiently large, difficult to impose a fee. Or you can talk about, okay, the road is very huge, wide network. Okay, difficult to establish, okay, multiple toll booth, and therefore, okay, you cannot charge motorists. Is going to be non-excludable. So remember, the concept that is tested here is to justify non-excludable. So long as there is a reasonable attempt to illustrate how could it be non-excludable, you will be granted credit. It has to be contextualized with respect to road. Right? Likewise, for non-rivalrous, I'm looking out for the attempt to illustrate. Okay, how does one motorist, when they consume road usage, how would it not affect others? So the condition for not affecting others would be what? Non-congested road, or traveling during non-peak season, non-peak hours. Non-peak hours will suggest that the road is not congested. And when it's not congested, it simply means that the consumption of the road by one user is not going to deprive the other in terms of quality or quantity. Is everyone following me? So remember, it's the attempt to illustrate NE and NR in play. Yeah? So do not jump into the question by going straight off and telling me that it's excludable and rivalrous. This way of answering is exceptionally dangerous because you are not addressing the explain. Okay, you are going straight to the comment. The comment has a lower weightage of marks. Okay? So for the comment part, we are looking out for the antithesis. We are looking out to justify how could it be excludable or how could it be rivalrous. Okay? So how could it be excludable? By inserting toll booths or ERP. Okay, in this case, ERP is a Singapore context, right? Toll booth is what you normally use in other countries. Right? If you've been to Malaysia, you realize there's specific highways you need to slow down and need to tap, right? Tap and go, I believe. Is it? Okay, all these are toll booths that are meant to charge motorists. You don't pay also can. Then you'll get a fine. You get a ticket. Then that is also not excludable. That's also excludable. That's also ESK. That's also excludable. Okay, so therefore, when you impose or you put toll booth in places, okay, this is going to make motorists going to be to pay for the usage of the road. Therefore, it's going to be excludable. Or you can talk about rivalrous. Okay, you can see that during peak period, okay, road consumption could be rivalrous because traffic may need to be diverted elsewhere. Okay, the motorists will have to use another road, which may lead to longer traffic timing, or they may be stuck in a jam. Therefore, okay, when you're traveling during peak hours, it's unlikely to be a public good. So the concept that is tested here is actually quasi-public good. And we are breaking up the quasi-public good into instances where they behave like a public good and instances where they behave like a non-public good. Okay? So regardless, however it's tested, always look out for NE and R. Okay, and the other side NE and R as well. Clear so far? Alright, okay, so before you chow, okay, remember to download a copy of the answer key before you chow. Hey, you run away means no more already. I'm not going to send you. Okay, so the submission timing is 2359 tonight. If you have difficulties meeting that, please let me know. Seek an extension. Okay, so with that, okay, if you have any questions for me, please stay back and ask me. Okay, I'm more than happy to address any concerns that you have. If not, okay,